Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone, and welcome to How to Transition to Entrepreneurship Full-Time. My name is Michelle Eisenberg, and I am a program assistant here at the Nasdaq Entrepreneurial Center. And for those of you who may not know, the Nasdaq Center is a nonprofit building a better path for entrepreneurs worldwide by improving inclusion, access, and knowledge in entrepreneurship. So, as you will see in the chat in a moment, the NASDAQ Center provides programs, resources, and exceptional mentorship to entrepreneurs across all races, industries, and geographies. So, definitely make sure to check out those links and resources in the chat. And then just a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. First, let us know where you are dialing in from in the chat. We always love to connect. And second, we are going to open up for live Q&A throughout the event. So please make sure to submit your questions for us in that Q&A function at the bottom of your screen throughout the presentation conversation. We will try our best to get to as many as possible. All right, and of course, none of what we do could be possible at the center without all of the amazing support from our sponsors, including Nasdaq, Lehigh University, KPMG, Wilson Sonsini, Wells Fargo, the Nareet Foundation, Walmart.org, JP Morgan Chase, BPM, HubSpot for Startups, and Google Cloud. We are humbled by their contributions and hope you are grateful too. All right. So before we get started, we always like to launch a couple polls to step back and see how everyone in the room is doing today. This first one is going to ask, how are you feeling? Fearful, anxious, surviving, or optimistic? And we'll give it just a few moments for folks to respond here. Thank you. Thank you. All right, we'll give it one more moment. Awesome. Okay, I'm going to end this poll and share these results. All right, optimism coming up in the lead. Always great to see. And we got some surviving and anxiety as well. So I'm very confident that our conversation today may help alleviate some of those anxious feelings. So I am going to stop sharing this poll and launch the second one. What is keeping you up at night? Finance, sales, marketing, scale, pivot, team, or surviving? And this one just tells us a little bit more about your current needs as an entrepreneur so we can make sure that the programs and resources that we develop going forward are meaningful for all of you. Awesome. We got folks from Pennsylvania, Massachusetts, Virginia, Alabama, North Carolina, Oklahoma, California, New York, Michigan, Ghana. Welcome, welcome. So great to have folks from all over the place. All right, I'll give this poll one more moment. Awesome. Okay, I'm going to end this poll and share these results. All right, finance coming up in the lead, scale close behind, and then we got some scale, surviving, and team. So awesome. Thank you so much for participating. Super helpful. So I'm going to stop sharing this poll, and without any further delay, please join me in giving the warmest welcome to our two special guests, Ethan Bernstein and Michael Horn, co-authors of Job Moves, 9 Steps for Making Progress in Your Career. Ethan, Michael, so excited to have you both here with us today for this topic. This is something that entrepreneurs are constantly asking us about, and it's just incredible to really focus in, and I'm excited to dive in. So thank you for being here.
Thanks for having us. We're excited.
Thank you. Thank you, Michelle.
Awesome. Well, before we jump into the conversation, I'd love if each of you could maybe give 30 seconds on just who you are and the work that you do. So maybe Ethan, I'll start with you.
Thank you, Michelle. So I am an associate professor in the organizational behavior unit at the Harvard Business School. I've been in the faculty for about a dozen years. I spend most of my time researching novel talent management practices and their effect on employee behavior, collaboration, performance. I also teach the Managing Human Capital course at HBS and the Developing Yourself as a Leader course at HBS, which is the source of some of the data for this book that Michael and I and Bob got to write together.
Love it. Amazing. And Michael?
Sure. Yeah. So the work I do is how to build a world in which all individuals can build their passions, fulfill their potential, and leave lives of purpose. And I do a lot of that work in the education realm through my teaching at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, through my writing and speaking, podcasting, and things of that nature. I was also the co-founder of the Clayton Christensen Institute for Disruptive Innovation, which I ran for about a decade, that focused as a think tank on how do we innovate in the sectors of education, healthcare, and global prosperity in particular. So I've been in the entrepreneurial shoes that some of you are in, and it's a heck of a lot of fun. It's a heck of a journey, and I'm excited to talk about it.
Amazing. Well, awesome, Michael. Let's start with you as we jump right in. And, with that, experience that you've had, being an entrepreneur and making that switch. And for many entrepreneurs, that, we hear that leaving a traditional job to become a full-time entrepreneur can really be a leap into the unknown and a long process. And so, what are some of the key factors that folks might consider to determine if entrepreneur is the right path for them and to make that transition?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll say as you're asking it, I have the cold sweat breaking out, remembering about a year or so of no salary and my parents being like, "What are you doing? Are you sure this is going to work out?" And all those questions. So I certainly remember it as you say it. Um, and Ethan, jump on in behind me here, but I think what I would say is there's sort of two questions coming together that you need to think about. On the first question is really, is now the right time for you to do this? Is the context right? The forces acting on you, meaning that now is the time for you to start something. And we'll maybe talk about that more in a moment around how a lot of our research in this book and Job Moves was helping you identify what are the forces acting on you that are causing you to say, today's the day I want to switch jobs or I want to start up a company or something like that, and really understanding the priorities you have at the moment and what trade-offs you're willing to make to get them. On the second question, you really also have to understand, is the day-to-day of what you do as an entrepreneur line up with the things that give you energy in your day-to-day life? And what I mean by that is entrepreneur is this great buzzword. It sounds awesome. It's something we talk a lot about in society. Ethan can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think a lot of the students who go to Harvard now want to be entrepreneurs. Uh, and yet they don't actually know what the day-to-day looks like, and sort of some of the things that you just saw there. Sales, right? Like huge factor in entrepreneurship, particularly in the first couple years of an organization, for the founder and CEO. And so really you have to actually understand what drives and drains your own energy. So that's a bunch of reflection. And then I'd say, like, get out and talk to real people who are entrepreneurs of the sort that you think you want to be, to see, like, how does their day to day and week to week line up with what they do, and line up with the things that actually give and drain your energy, to understand, is this going to be a really good fit? And I'll just say a third thing that's advice someone gave me a long time ago. Ethan, offline, I will actually tell you who gave the advice. It's someone we both know. But uh, she said to me, you have to be super passionate about the idea that you're getting into as well. If you don't have that energy for the cause or the reason or the problem you're solving or something around that, where like you can't imagine not doing it in some ways, it's probably not the right thing for you either, because you're not willing to make the trade-offs that are required to go into entrepreneurship, which again might be around uncertainty, salary, caring for others, whatever it might be in your life. So those are the sort of three sets of factors that I think about. Ethan,
Yeah.
organize me and improve me.
I'll just build on Michael. So we say to our advisees, and as we say in the book, that anytime you make a job move, it's important to think about what you're going to do, not what you're going to be. And it is so easy to get pulled in by the idea of being an entrepreneur without actually thinking of doing entrepreneurship in a meaningful way. Just thinking of that survey you asked at the beginning, Michelle, like it's challenging and scary and exciting and energizing all at the same time. And different pieces will be different for different people. So as I think of my own move, I was in an entrepreneurial endeavor once in my life, primarily because when I was doing my doctorate at HBS, my roommate, actually, when we were sharing a suite on campus, finished his dissertation and decided that rather than being an academic, he'd be an entrepreneur. And over time, I wasn't actually thinking about it, but I found myself with a little bit of time on my hands, just in between things. And I got pulled in by him. And so I don't think I ever lost the title acting. I was never actually like there was no serious. I was always acting, but I was acting for a while, acting COO, for example. And so we say in the book, and we build on Clay Christensen's theory of jobsy done work, Clay was my dissertation advisor. Michael, of course, had a deep connection to Clay as well as a co-author and other roles. That you only move jobs when you have both a push and a pull, when those pushes and pull forces align to overcome the habit of the present and overcome that fear of something new. And so if you're really thinking, okay, so there's a push here that sort of matches with a pull. In my case, I didn't have much of a push. I wasn't driving myself away from something. I was like, I hate this job. I need to get away from it. And it would be so much better to work for myself. I was more pulled by, this sounds like a really interesting thing to do. But ideally, you have both of those things because you don't want to switch with one and not the other, or you find yourself perhaps not landing where you wanted to land.
Yeah, of course. Such great insights. And, I know entrepreneurs are always asking, like, how do I know if it's the right time to start a business? And, of course, there's always going to be uncertainty there. But I love this whole idea of, really challenging yourself to think about, like, what is your day-to-day going to look like? That will potentially influence, your decision to bring on a co-founder or even, maybe take on a role that's not CEO. Maybe you'll be the COO or, find that position within the business that, you serve best. And so that's all part of that. So really awesome. And, as we're kind of thinking about,
I like your
um,
co-founder there, Michelle.
she's always interrupting, always trying to help.
The best roommate.
Um, yeah, so, something that you've discussed, in the book is this idea of your quest for progress. And I'd love, Ethan, maybe if you could talk a little bit more about what that means and how aspiring entrepreneurs can start to use this framework to identify and clarify their own motivations and set that clear direction for transition.
So I'll probably need to back up a little bit and say, so the book is based on a data set of over 1,000 people who switched jobs. They weren't just entrepreneurs or going towards entrepreneurship. Some of them were going towards, some of them were going away, but all just switched jobs. And we interviewed them qualitatively, 60-minute plus interviews. Some of them were my students, some of them were our advisees. All of us got involved. We coded those interviews to try and understand in the language of jobs done theory, which is this idea from marketing, that people don't buy products. They hire a product for a job to be done in their life. They're trying to make progress by hiring that product to do something. That people also hire their next role for progress in their career. And if we understood better the specification of that progress, then individually and as an organization hiring someone, we could do a better job of matching a person's desired progress in their career with the roles that we were providing, and everyone could make more progress and be better off. So that we wouldn't have, Clay didn't want to have failed innovative products. We didn't want to have people who invest a ton in making a switch or trying something new fail because they hadn't specified the move as well as they could. And so we took all those interviews, we coded the data, we came up with actually just 30 forces, 14 pushes, 16 pulls.
Yep, you got it right.
That we found, not that doesn't encompass everybody, but it encompasses many. And we thought, great, we've got an answer. 30 different pushes and pulls, just pick them off the menu. And some people said, well, that's really helpful. And other people said, that's too many. And so we looked for patterns, and we found 4 patterns that we ended up calling quests for progress, patterns of those pushes and pulls that we thought defined different approaches. And with the idea that if you were in one quest, the advice that would be good for you would probably not be good for you if you were in one of the other 3. And that all 3 of us, I'm sorry, all of us go through all 4 quests over the course of time. It's more of a stage thing than a personality or a person question. So with all that, Michelle, sorry for all the lead in.
No, that's
Um,
great.
the four quests are: 1, people who are just being pushed away from something and want to get anywhere are essentially getting out. They are people who both find that the current role is de-energizing, it just drains their energy, and people who find that the organization that is asking them to do things is making use of capabilities they don't want to use anymore.
Mm.
Perhaps by accident, perhaps it was on a path and they've decided that actually I didn't really want to do this. I thought I did and I changed my mind. They're just trying to get on and find something new. And sometimes that is, getting out is the mother of invention. Sometimes you escape and you discover, hey, there's an opportunity here. And I think that does describe some of the entrepreneurs that we've seen in our data set. On the other end, people who love what they do, it's energizing, and the what of what they do is exactly what they want to keep building. They want to keep building those skills. Those people are trying to take the next step. And the organizations of the world are designed to enable taking the next step. That's the good old ladder. But so are, for example, serial entrepreneurship paths. So those are the on diagonal. But I've been talking a bunch. Michael, do you want to do the off diagonal ones?
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to. Actually, let me give a quick vignette though on the next steppers because I think that's interesting. I held a role at a venture studio for a number of years, and the person who had found that, Paul Friedman, classic sort of next step of founding his next company, where he sort of would hit a personal milestone or feel like he had brought the company to the stage where he was uniquely situated to add value, and then his mind was immediately thinking about next problem, right? And as an entrepreneur, that's how he saw himself. Um, the next quest for project progress we saw in the data was what we called regain control. So these were individuals who actually liked a lot of what they were doing in the day to day of their job, but they didn't like how their energy was being used and how their time was being used, sort of what was being asked of that. And so they looked to regain control. Now, sometimes this was work-life balance. That's often not something you associate with entrepreneurship. But frankly, sometimes it was, I want to be freed up to do the best work for me and the way I'm being micromanaged by my boss, or, oh my gosh, they're not seeing this opportunity because they're controlling how I work. And if I just had the freedom to do these things, I could start something big, was the spark for these folks. And then regain alignment was the last quest. And this was sort of the opposite, as Ethan just described, of the regain control. These were people that actually liked how their time and energy was being used, but they
Mm.
didn't like what they were being asked to do. They felt like their skill set was being misrepresented or underutilized or not respected, something like that. And they wanted to be doing the work that they thought they were called to do, if you will, at that given point in time. And I think this gets into the question of entrepreneurship as well a lot of times because sort of you referenced it, Michelle. Just because you're starting a company doesn't mean you are the CEO. You get choice around that, or how you craft, right? Your CEO role is something that not only do you have to think a lot about at the beginning of a company, but it's something that you have to frankly reinvent several times as the company grows and scales or pivots and things of that nature. And so regaining alignment with the skill set that you think, like the capabilities that you want to be leaning in on and you have expertise around and are the good match for the stage of the company is really an art form to really be constantly reinventing yourself. And I think, Ethan, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but a lot of times we think of it in leadership, certainly person who starts the company is not necessarily the person who scales it, who then puts in a lot of formal processes as it gets bigger. But it actually could be if that individual is able to actually constantly be in reinventing and regaining alignment based on their desires and the organization's needs. And actually having that nimbleness as an individual can keep you really fresh in that entrepreneur role.
And so
Right.
I'll just pick up and say, and then Michelle, I promise we'll let you back in. The the all four of these are doorways into entrepreneurship, as we're suggesting. And they can all be successful doorways. But if you don't know which doorway you're in, then whether or not you're going to enjoy doing the job on the other side and how you might specify the job on the other side and how you get there is going to differ. So we had the anonymous attendee who said, this is almost exactly how I feel. I want to do great work freely with less politics. That's a regain control conversation. So it's very possible, for example, that if you want to get on any rocket ship you can, if that's what control means for you, with doing great work freely with less politics, but it doesn't matter necessarily what industry or field that entrepreneurial endeavor might be. Whereas somebody who's regaining alignment is going to be like, ah, whatever, I can deal with politics.
Yeah.
I think that we are destined to transform the entire field of education. And so I'm going to go in there, even if it means that I know that academic institutions that I'm going to be competing against are extremely political, and therefore that's going to carry over into my world. I'm making that up. I'm not saying anything about my particular industry or Michael's, but you see, it actually helps, I hope helps entrepreneurs specify the path, which is particularly difficult because you do have so much flexibility when you think about that move.
Yeah. Oh, so much to think about. And it's really helpful to, kind of, think about those as boxes. And I'm sure we have entrepreneurs in the audience that fall into, each of those four categories. And so as we're kind of, thinking about what this transition looks like, that can be a really helpful starting point. So thank you. And I think so far we've talked about a lot about, just really positioning yourself to like make the right decision around transitioning, whether to transition to entrepreneurship. For those that do, who do decide that they want to transition to entrepreneurship full time, and of course, just from your experience, doing this research and the work that you do, what are some of the common mistakes that you've seen people make, when transitioning, and how can they avoid those mistakes?
I'll name a couple maybe to start, and then Ethan jump in with some of them that you see. But the first one I think goes back to something I said in the beginning, which is so the way I like to think about it is the quest for progress and the forces are sort of the spark that cause you to say, I need to do something different. It's, in the case of entrepreneurship, I think I want to start a company and actually solve a problem in the world, right, of some sort. And and then you got to figure out the doing versus being question. Like, what am I actually going to do in this role? And here's where I think one of the biggest mistakes occurs is people forget that the act of creating a company, the act of switching jobs, all of these things are fundamentally social processes. And so it's one of the big reasons that I said, talk to entrepreneurs and figure out like the ones that are in the field or companies like what you think you want to build. You should know what that is like and what the real trade-offs and opportunities and how they match with your priorities is actually going to look like. Have those conversations up front. Don't be surprised. One of my students, I was coaching him last semester, and he was saying, I really want to start a company. And he was describing the company, and it was sort of a B2B idea, selling into businesses. And I was like, so let me be super clear about what that means for you for the next at least 2 to 3 years. You're going to be doing a lot of sales
Yeah.
because I don't think I've ever seen a startup company B2B where the CEO and founder is not the sort of evangelist selling. And he was like, oh, I don't know about that. You got to be eyes wide open on how these things match up. And so I think forgetting that it's social is a huge mistake I see people make, so that they don't figure out, I guess this is the second mistake, the doing versus being piece of it. And then the third one I would just name, and then Ethan, I'll turn it over to you, because people haven't done the important work of understanding what's driving them to start this or switch right now, as Ethan sort of laid out on those quests for progress. They aren't clear on their priorities, and therefore they're not clear about the trade-offs that they are or aren't willing to make as they start this company. And what I mean, I referenced the not having salary for 12 months, right? that's a trade-off I was willing to make because of the things that I got to do and the upside that I saw ultimately, right, down the path, and it worked out. But being clear-eyed about that is really important so that you know I'm making this trade-off so that I get these other things. And it's not settling for, no salary for a year. It's a trade-off that you want to be able to basically say, I'm choosing to make this so that I get to do these other things. And I think a lot of times we don't think deeply about the trade-offs we are making or know how to make them ahead of time before we actually launch the venture or make a switch.
Mm.
Ethan, improve.
No, I'm just I can never improve on my code. I can never improve on my code, but I can add. So building a little bit on that, um, we mentioned the word energy a number of times. In the book, we go through an exercise in which we encourage people to really look at their past endeavors and figure out what drained and drove their energies in those endeavors and look at how the trends have changed over time and then think about their current state and their current state of mind and what they want to prioritize, as Michael's suggesting. We do that also so that it encourages people to think about the experiences they want, not the features they're seeking. It's so easy, I've seen, at least with some of my students who go into entrepreneurship, that you quickly end up with the question of, so what's my title and how much equity am I getting and it's these are important facets, of course, but they're all features. If you're early on in your career, they're probably less relevant than the experiences you're going to get that will feed you into whatever it is you think you're going to be doing in 5 to 10 years, 15 years time. Of course, we're all hoping that you'll be successful. That startup founder that I joined as an acting COO once, he's still out there. They're doing well. But there's also a lot of move in and out of entrepreneurial ventures, and everything is a step of some kind or other. So that experience is important. So that's one. The second, as I think about Michael's suggestion that it's a social endeavor, make sure you're not just talking to people like you.
Mm.
So it's important, I have just down the road here in Wellesley, we have one of the best entrepreneurship institutions in terms of educational institutions in the world, Babson. You'll find a lot of people who will talk to you from the inside out of entrepreneurship there. But I would have, to Makia's comment in the Q&A, I would have just as many conversations with people in established organizations too. If you love your job in an established organization, you're just tired of how little control you have over the politics or how work gets done, then having conversations with the people around you, hey, this is what I'm thinking about. Do you think this sounds like me? I understand that's risky because you don't want to lose your job, but oftentimes people love having developmental conversations with the people who report to them or their peers or even their supervisors. Those conversations will either tell you, oh yeah, Ethan, I've always thought you ought to be an entrepreneur, or are you sure? Because actually, if we just change this or that, we might be able to make this place even better for you. And people are oftentimes very hesitant to try and make their current environment better rather than going off. And I realize we're in a group here that's all about trying to encourage people into the space, but sometimes the right answer is stick it out for a little while longer and see if you can fix it first. And when you learn how to fix something, that's also entrepreneurial in nature. And then just one last one. We treat this as a new product development process.
Mm.
We are products, human beings, our careers. And so if you think about the way in which you'd invent a product, so Bob Mesta, our third co-author, has invented more products than any human being I've ever met. And he will tell us, because he solved this one for us, that when you're inventing a new product, you never try to make one prototype. You aim for 3 to 5.
Mm.
And then you look at how they're different and you try to use the contrast to create meaning and create the best prototype or prototypes for the end of the line.
Okay.
We're used to actually in careers doing the opposite. And it's very difficult. So Ethan, what do you want to do? Like, just tell me, what do you want to do? And that's a very hard question to answer. It's much easier for someone to say, so if I made you come up with 3 to 5 things you might want to do next, what might they be? It's a much easier question to answer initially, and then that provides you with a bunch of data on how you're thinking about things. And almost always, if you ask someone that, one of those 5 will be some kind of entrepreneurial endeavor. which I think would both encourage people to be more thoughtful about their move into it and perhaps encourage more people to do it.
Yeah.
Can I just jump off one really quick thing Ethan just talked about in terms of the experiences of what you want to do, not be. We got this question with a bunch of entrepreneurs. This was a couple weeks ago. We were in a group talking to them, um, and they were thinking about this in terms of how they build their teams and how they hire. And the reason I bring this up at this juncture is because this is something you can also use as a process to help figure out, is this the right fit for what you need to get done and for what they're trying to do on your team? Um, and someone immediately raised their hand in that group and said, well, money is not on your list as a push or pull that's causing someone to do something. And the reason is, and Ethan alluded to it, that's why I wanted to pick up on this. Money is a feature, but it's not the underlying cause. So like, why do you need money right now? Is it so that you can support, two kids under 5 in childcare? Is it so that you can care for some elderly loved ones who need some extra support? Is it so that you're, about to have kids go to college or something like that, and you're doing so? Like, we have to understand the why underneath it, because then that also suggests that there's other ways to solve it. And so just to call that one out, money is actually very rarely, if ever, causal. It's sort of one layer above, and we have to dig a little bit deeper to understand what's causing money to become important in this context. And is it really about the money, or is that indicative of respect or something else that you really feel like you need in your career at this point?
And similarly, titles the same way. So I had
Yeah.
we've mentioned a few times as we've talked about the book, I had a protagonist in my classroom at one point who told my students the title has a huge ROI on your ego, but that doesn't last very long.
Mm.
So, and then the way this sometimes plays out, I've occasionally had an aspiring entrepreneur say, I don't want to join an entrepreneurial endeavor where I can't be the CEO, but I don't like fundraising. Is that going to work? Why do you want to be the CEO then? Why don't you want to be the fantastic partner to the CEO, COO? Like there are other roles
Yeah.
that will give you the ability to achieve things, but they're like, but I want the title. But
Yeah.
why? That's the being versus doing we were talking about before, and it's so easy. I mean, we all fall into the trap. But remember that I think the most unhappy people are the people who ultimately discover they don't like doing what it takes in order to be what they want to be.
It's great
Yeah.
advice.
Oh, so wonderful. And, I know you were kind of sprinkling in here this idea of like focusing on experiences rather than features. And you've given so many great examples of just like what actually qualifies as like more of a feature than an experience. And I'd love to hear if, you can talk more about, what are some of those experiences that can help entrepreneurs design a meaningful and sustainable business for themselves, and just would love to hear more about what that mindset looks like and how it drives success.
Ethan, can I cold call you and have you give the kitchen analogy, like, searching for apartments and houses first, just to illustrate the point even more deeply, and then we can dig from there?
I just want to point out here that Michael enjoys cold calling the HBS professor.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. This is the irony, right?
That's the
Yeah.
only reason he's just done this because he could tell this
I'm
story better than
I'm
I
getting
could.
back at all of my professors from my life. Anyway, go ahead.
I
Exactly.
thought I was your friend. No. So the classic example is if you go to buy a condo and you look at the listing, the real estate listing will have things like granite countertops, open kitchen, number of bedrooms and bathrooms, size of, whatever it might be, all of these are attributes. They're all features. And they bring us in and we think, oh, well, if this one has granite countertops and this one doesn't, I really want to go with the one that does because that's how it's designed to sell us. But then when we go and tour it, it ends up being totally unimportant unless it's for some reason important to our experience because we're not buying the countertops and the lack of walls. We're buying the idea that we're going to be able to enjoy cooking in a kitchen that has our family or our friends or our partner or whoever it might be, our friends invited over around us, and that we're all doing it communally. And we can actually, we walk in and rather than looking at the listing, now we can picture the experience of
Right.
doing it. And that's that. And I don't know if that makes it more sustainable necessarily. Heaven knows that I'm not as good at cooking when people are watching me as when I'm not being watched. But it certainly makes it more meaningful, and it helps us visualize that purchase. And the challenge is that it's relatively difficult to do that on the career side
Yeah.
relative to the product side, but it's not impossible. So maybe Michael can tell us a little bit more about how we suggest doing that.
Yeah, well, let me say something on this, which is, I think, frankly, and we should have said this up front when you were talking about the quest for progress and what forces are acting on you. If you go to jobmoves.com and click on the resources tab, there's a free assessment that allows you to see what quest for progress is acting on you right now and what's unintentional. So we built this for people who are actually grappling with the switch or were curious about analyzing a past switch. But what has been unintentional in that is that we have found individuals in entrepreneurial roles specifically who have used it on themselves in the midst of their their venture to figure out how they adjust their job title in real time around what is draining or driving their energy. And so I'll give you a quick example where one individual, he was starting to feel like just bogged down by the details of certain things, and he couldn't figure out what the funk was. And he was like, "Do I need to like leave my company? Like, what's going on here?" And so he took the assessment and realized he was in regain alignment. So, in other words, he still liked how he was working and how his time was being used and interactions with team members and things like that. But what he was doing was starting to become a big drain on him. And he looked at his calendar and realized, wow, somehow I have signed up for these sorts of meetings where I know I don't excel and I don't enjoy them. And there's someone else in the team that does them better. And somehow I said I would do the brainstorming for this, product development feature, et cetera, et cetera. And he was like, if I can just offload two or three things to other people on my team who actually like doing them better and are better at it than I am, then all of a sudden, like, I'm going to be back in flow. And so literally it was just a couple micro adjustments. And then he was like, I feel like I'm starting the company again. Like my energy's back to, full force. And so I think that's part of this is that we actually, what we realized, I think, in writing this book also is that to some degree, job descriptions, they're all made up in some sense. Like someone makes them up. And so you actually, by getting more articulate about where you really want to excel, the capabilities, the skill sets, the assets that you really want to bring to bear, and frankly, what you don't want to do. Like,
Hmm.
I am not good at this, or I'm not interested in developing my skill set here. And just being honest about that and crafting your job to where you can really make a difference um, is something that you can be proactive about to really actually make this something that the doing will match where your talents really are. Now, look, there are some cases where that means you got to pull the Andy Grove, Gordon Moore moment in Intel and sort of walk out the door, fire yourself, and come back in as the new CEO. And there's some times where you're going to say, I actually don't think I can do that. I should find someone else at this point to be CEO, to Ethan's point. Like fundraising is really critical right now. It isn't for me for any number of reasons. I'm going to have that hard conversation. But I think the point is you have to have that clarity around it to figure out, is this something I can do? Or do I need to find someone else who can to keep me in flow in this job? Sorry, last thing, it brings up one other step in the book, which again, Ethan, we've alluded to a couple times, but I think we should make explicit. We have this notion of the balance sheet of your personal balance sheet, the assets and liabilities that you bring into any job role. And what we mean by that are assets are things that you possess that derive that they basically are the source of future economic value. So they're your skills, they're your credentials, they're your knowledge, your capabilities, things of that nature. And we acquire assets right at a cost in terms of money, time, things like that. There's obligations to be able to have them and keep them up to date. And those are your liabilities in essence. And what we tell people is to be super honest about what are your capability, like what are the assets, right, on the balance sheet? What's it going to take to keep them current? And are those investments that you actually want to be making? Because they're actually line up with the things that give you energy. Like, what's that Venn diagram? And I think a lot of people don't do that hard work either. I'll give you one example from me and then I'll shut up, I promise. But I loved, like when I started the Christensen Institute, I loved managing people and building teams.
Yeah.
Nothing gave me more energy than doing that. And then my twin girls were born a little over a decade ago. And like overnight, it felt like, but sort of over the course of a year, I realized that while I think I'm still pretty good at managing people, it was draining energy like out of control. The last thing I wanted to do was manage other people's problems and challenges and get them excited about showing up and doing great work. And flip of a switch, right? My context changed. And so context is really important to understand these capabilities and understanding which ones you want to keep investing in. I will be the first one to tell you, I have not invested in being a manager since then. The venture studio where I was got acquired by a company we had actually started in a very weird twist. I went in full time and I had a team. And I did not enjoy the experience at all of managing again because I hadn't invested in it and I wasn't capable of making those trade-offs anymore.
Yeah. Oh, so much golden wisdom in there. And, I love this idea of, the small changes can really make a difference. And of course, something you highlighted earlier of, this is a continuous process and it's not kind of like, oh, I kind of, discover these things one time at the beginning of my journey. It's like kind of a continuous discovery process. And love this analogy of, the looking at a new home. And, I think entrepreneurs, in the audience can really challenge themselves to really envision, what that day to day could look like, what the experiences could look like, versus the features. And, I think that will really help, shape their decisions around transitioning to entrepreneurship. So that's wonderful. And I'm so glad you brought up the balance sheet, because I know that's, of course, something that entrepreneurs are thinking about as they transition to entrepreneurship, the pathway to paying themselves and just generally what financial planning looks like. So what steps do you think individuals should take to prepare for, transitioning to entrepreneurship and, maintaining success long term?
Where do you want to, you want me to start, Ethan, or you want to?
Well, hey, you can start with this one.
All right, sounds good. So Ethan said it earlier, context on this is really, really important, right? If you're early in your career, you don't have dependents who are leaning on you, and individuals around you who are relying on you for certain things. That gives you certain freedom. If you're in a different context, there's certain other factors that are just reality, right? You have to understand, again, money is not the reason, but the underlying reason is lurking there, and it makes money important. And so I think being extremely clear-eyed about what that means, that you are willing to trade off on to get this entrepreneurial venture is really important, but then becoming a problem solver around, are there other ways to get that entrepreneurial start that can mitigate the trade-offs you're making? And I'll just give a couple examples. A lot of people, I think, default into a mindset of, I'm starting a business, I got to go get venture financing to start it up. And that's going to require certain sacrifices and thinking about cap tables and the like. Maybe not. Maybe you actually start your business as a side hustle while you're still in your current employment, and you build up some revenue ahead of time before you make the jump. Maybe you start and you go in to a venture studio where you're actually pulling down a salary and you can work with a team there around starting a company that's going to ultimately spin off, but is built initially with a group around you. So you're not eating ramen for the first year and a half of the entrepreneurial venture, right? Um, Getting clear-eyed about, again, the trade-offs of different routes and how you structure it, I think is really important. And then something else, we coached another individual who was grappling with a bunch of things. He had three choices on the table. One was start his own company. Two was go in-house at a rather large company where he would have been making like a $400,000 or something annual salary. And then a third one was be chief of staff to a CEO of a startup. And that one was like $250,000 or something like that. So $150,000 haircut, right? He realized for family reasons, like the full off start it now, it was not the right time and place for him to do it. But he thought about that I still do really want to start a company again at some point. And I really want to learn from this entrepreneur, sort of option door number three, if you will. And so he took that job, which had considerably less salary. And we asked him, we were like, you just traded off on $150,000 a year. You have mouths to feed. What, like, why? And he said, well, I realized that these are the three things I really want to learn from this person. I think my day-to-day experience, and like he articulated it all, right? He was very clear. This is what I get by being in this role. And these are what the experiences are going to look like. And it's going to set me up to be able to do this in the future. And then we said to him, so you realize you intentionally traded off on the 150K so that you could get these experiences. When you show up, that means you cannot complain about the fact that you have a lower salary than perhaps you are worth in the market. And he said, yeah, you're right. I'm not settling. I am making an eyes wide open decision around that. I know what I am getting for it, right? I'm willing in essence, in some ways, to pay
Yeah.
in the loss of future earnings so that I get these experiences. And eyes wide open, great experience. I think he is setting himself up to start a company.
And by the way, that's the same whether it's 150 or 250 and 400, or if it's 65 and 55.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
So it's different considerations, but it's the same process. It's the same consideration also of, so am I looking for time? Am I looking for exposure? Am I looking for other pieces of this? How do I test and try? So, we live in a world of side hustles. I love these surveys that claim they know exactly how many people, a percentage of people that are doing side hustles right now. I don't know that I believe the data or the approach, the protocols they've used, but nonetheless, there are a lot of ways to learn. And it depends on, so one of the other exercises we have in the book, we borrow Pixar's story spine exercise so that people can ultimately tell the story of why they made the decisions they've made, so that the next decision they make looks right for the people who are evaluating them for that, whether it's the investors they might be talking to, or the teammates they might be joining, or the person who might be hiring them. And so that story spine you're building constantly. It's basically the Mad Lib approach to once upon a time blank, because of that, then one day blank, because of that blank, because of blank, until one day. And it's just a way of creating the narrative of a Pixar movie, but also the way of creating a narrative, a short elevator pitch like narrative for filling in the white spaces on someone's CV, so that you're not, students come to me and ask, so do I have to stay in the job for 2 years, 3 years? Like, what's the standard these days? And the answer is, I don't think people are evaluating people based on the number of years. I think they're evaluating people based on the logic behind the moves. And so that person that Michael's talking about has a real logic that some people might say is poor logic, but other people may think is excellent logic.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
about
You've just
fit.
got a
Sorry,
question.
and to Evan's question, I think spot on. This is exactly what I was going to say as Ethan described the story spine. It's going to help you pitch better what you're doing ultimately if you take the same techniques. It's storytelling. Humans are wired to learn through stories. If you learn to tell your story, whether it's your personal story or your company's story really well, it's going to resonate more with people, and then they can evaluate, as Ethan said, does this land with me or not? That's a separate question, but they'll remember it.
Because we also hear, I think we're fond of saying, or at least some investors say, I invest in the person, I don't invest in the business. And I think some people interpret that as, oh, I don't have enough of a prestigious background, or I don't have the right degree, or I don't have the right, entrepreneurial experience before, or whatever it might. And that's certainly a part of the person, but at least I know some investor for whom it's about the compelling story.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. And we hear that so much, as we're in conversation with investors like that. And so, as entrepreneurs, it can be so difficult to break free from, limiting beliefs and those kind of that fear of failure. And so
Hmm.
what can entrepreneurs, do as they're, leaving a traditional job or employment, to build confidence and resilience to navigate the potential risks of this kind of transition?
I'll take a first stab and then Ethan jump in. I would say two things. Number one, you remember when Ethan described the forces that cause us to say or propel us to switch. So there's the push of the current and the pull of what might be. And then impeding that are the habits of the present. And then the one that he said that I want to focus on here are the anxieties about the new thing that you might do. And I think getting really clear around what you're anxious about is really important to understand what's holding you back from making the switch or making the plunge. And then you can really think about it, right? Like, do the pulls and pushes, do the logic outweigh it for me? Can I mitigate them in different ways? Are there ways to test this in low key ways? In the same way, frankly, I'm going to build my product when I launch my company to do it, to prototype these in different ways to gain information and perhaps lower the temperature around the anxiety. There's a whole set of things you can do around that that I think are really important. But this mental diagram, if you will, pushes and pulls causing you to take that plunge, habits and anxieties holding you back, and really getting in on what are the anxieties, and then um, testing them and figuring out mitigation strategies, I think is something to really think about. And it's another lesson from product design, as you all are building companies, will give as well. A lot of people, when they see that their customers are sort of frozen from buying something new, they think, oh, I have to add new features. And sometimes adding new features actually increases anxiety because the customers think, oh my God, am I going to be able to use that? Is that going to break on me? What's that going to do? And so actually reducing anxiety and simplifying actually sometimes helps people make switches and progress and buy things. So you can do the same thing in your own career. The second thing I would tell you is, and this gets to sort of my thing around education and learning, but and certainly Ethan, you see this in the entrepreneurship world quite a bit, which is um, I think you need to be very serious about yourself of like what really is the price of quote unquote failure. As in, like, is it really going to set you back in many ways? And I think, Ethan, you know a lot of investors too that actually like to invest in someone who has failed and learned lessons and is coming back a second time, provided that they actually learned lessons from it. And that's the thing that I want to key off on here is, to me, failure is how we learn. And the key is how do we have fast failure so we're constantly reflecting and learning lessons as opposed to sort of spectacular blowout failures that really does set us back. But these sort of short cycle, quick failures, learning a lot, I think that's actually how we make progress and learn in our lives.
And I'm going to take a slightly counterintuitive approach to answering the question, Michelle. I actually think that the risks might be good things, the way we
Mm.
Mm,
perceive them. So I'm going to use another Bobism here. Progress, not perfection.
mm,
That's how people build careers. That's how people build companies. It's about the trade-offs. It's not about the dream job. We believed when we started this, all three of us agreed, we're not writing a dream job book because we don't believe in a dream job book. We believe in a trade-offs book. And Michael talked about that already. So going in with your eyes wide open means the realities of understanding the risks you're taking. But if the trade-offs are worth it, then there's no better thing to do.
Mhm.
And with that, I'll sort of one key of that. So progress, not perfection, for me is a message around not getting overly paralyzed by the risks, by all the steps we're saying you need to take, by all this is all intended to provide understanding where previously there might have been fear. Understanding still is risky, but don't let the understanding overwhelm you. So I'm gonna call it. I know one member of the audience at least has a young child. So when very young, just newborn, when Bernie decides in the morning that he's going to try to lift his head a little bit more than he has before, or maybe make another small step towards crawling, I don't think he's gone through our 9 steps to do so. Um, so sometimes we just do things intuitively because it seems right. The key to all of this is deciding what are the key pieces of it for you. What are the trade-offs that are most important at this stage? It doesn't have to be true in 2 years, 3 years time, or even 2 months down the line, but right now, so that you can figure out whether or not it's right for you. And if it is, then you construct the world in which it makes sense. So you can make progress, not perfection.
Yeah, absolutely. And yes, so true how like, perfection can be paralyzing. And it's like if I can't do it perfectly, then I won't do it at all. And there is that in between to consider, absolutely. And that's really what brings the progress. So wonderful. Awesome. This Ethan Michael has been such a wonderful conversation. And just to close us out, I'd love to know just looking at the current landscape of work and entrepreneurship. What do each of you believe to be some of the biggest opportunities and challenges for those considering the switch in the coming years?
I want to hear Ethan's here on. Can I cold call you again,
Hey, of
Ethan, or do
course,
you want go
I know
for
you
it?
wanted another chance to do that.
Right.
Look, it's my own view of this world of entrepreneurship is that it would be malpractice for the Harvard professor to claim that I can predict what it is that where this is going. We academics would like to predict the past because we're usually right. Predicting the future is a much more risky game. But it does seem as if the world is bending a little bit towards smaller ventures having the advantage relative to where they have in the past. Whether
Mhm.
that's in education, whether that's in various industries, wherever that is, it does feel like that trend is continuing. And so I think the optimism that at least most of the people in the group mentioned, Michelle, at the beginning on the survey, I think that's real. And so then the question is, when do you find your pulls and your pushes and choose the timing? It's not, I don't think that window is going to close in the short term. So if you got a long window, now the question is, when can you do it that's best for you? Don't be too captured by the opportunity coming and going. That would be my own advice, because I think the timing can be more about a person's needs and the career needs than necessarily the particular endeavor that you're aiming for.
That is beautiful. I think the only thing I would say is I do think so. I'm going to put my disruptive innovation lens hat on for a moment here and just say technology can be used to disrupt industries or it can be used to sustain them. And obviously, we see AI is everywhere at the moment and causing a lot of energy chaos, speculation, all the rest. Um, and my sense is that there's a lot of sustaining innovation use cases for AI, but my belief is that as a technology enabler, the sort of the AI first, if you will, businesses are going to be the ones that really redefine how our society uses it and takes advantage of it. And I think for you all, it doesn't have to be AI per se, but I'm sort of using that as a catch-all to say, I think there really is a window to start a bunch of things that solve real problems in our world, society, that are confronting individuals and so forth right now, uh, that help us make progress, leveraging things like AI. And my belief is it's going to be, when we really put it together, it's going to be this turbocharging of human productivity in some really cool ways. If we can match it to do the low level things that take stuff off our plate to allow us to sort of work at the frontier of our humanity. And for you all to create these organizations that have that at their heart and are native to that world, I think is could be a tremendous advantage and an exciting opportunity. And so I'd say go seize the day and let's see where we can innovate to make things better for us all.
Amazing. Michael, Ethan, this has been so incredible. On behalf of the Nasdaq Entrepreneurial Center and everyone here today, just want to extend our deepest gratitude for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for letting us be part of your amazing venture. This is awesome.
Wonderful. And to our audience, we are going to put some links in the chat. Check out Job Moves, check out Ethan and Michael. And then there's some other links in the chat as well. Thank you all so much for joining us today. We look forward to welcoming you back online with us soon. And you can view upcoming classes by clicking those other links that are going to be posted in the chat. All right. Thank you all so much and have a good one.